Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the X's and Dogs podcast. Well, we are now fully through the college football season, and we're very close to being through the NFL season as we sit here in the middle of the week leading up to the conference championship games in the NFL. I wanted to start today's show by talking to you guys about my thoughts kind of regarding the national championship game, going over some of the takeaways, relating it to the Browns in a little bit later. But my shotgun reaction of the national championship game is that these were likely the two best teams in the country going at it. You know, I think as we look back at the college football season, most people would agree that the three best teams probably were Indiana, Miami, and Ohio State, more than likely in that order. And I think it's a fair representation that we had Miami facing off against Indiana in the national championship game, wrapping up a very, very entertaining college football postseason. And it's one we haven't seen a similar style to really in as long as I can remember, where it felt like there were more than 5 teams that could truly win it all this year. Miami showcased that in their ability to make it to the national championship and really be a few plays away from winning that game. I want to talk about how really remarkable the run that Indiana went on this season is. You know, for a team who just a couple years ago were one of the bottom barrel teams in the Big Ten, one of the teams in the Power 5 conferences that were viewed as a basketball school and not a football school, never really had some good seasons, but never really had a season where you took them seriously with the rest of the big dogs. And, you know, for a school like that to, in 2 years, turn it around in the way that they did with Curt Cignetti, to me, speaks to really to the impact that Cignetti has had on that, in that organization, in that school, and is ultimately just one of the better stories that I can think of and remember in college football. It really is not common in the sport of college football to have teams like Indiana make it to the playoffs, let alone win the national championship. And I know NIL and the current landscape and world we live in with college football is going to change that idea entirely. And we're probably watching it play out in front of us in real time. But, you know, Indiana being the first team who was able to do something like this, it really is crazy to watch as, you know, somebody who, I don't advertise as a huge college football fan, but I've been watching the sport for years, and, you know, to watch that has been very, very interesting, very entertaining. I think it has its positives and negatives overall for the sport of football. That's NFL and college football combined. There's good things about that, bad things about that. And we don't have enough time to talk about all those in today's podcast, but really remarkable, like I said, what they were able to do in Indiana, going undefeated, winning the national championship, having the Heisman on the team. And let's talk about that Heisman winner, Fernando Mendoza, because you can say all you want about Cignetti and you can say all you want about this fantastic Indiana football team, and it's all true. But without the quarterback that Fernando Mendoza was able to be for this team, they never would have been able to more than likely even win a playoff game, because we saw them last season make it to the playoffs but not able to get over that hump because they lacked in the quarterback position. They bring in Fernando, and immediately the team turns from a fun story to the best team in the country at the snap of a finger. And I go on social media, I go on Twitter, and I still see and read takes from a lot of Browns fans, also fans of other teams, who want to doubt this kid and doubt his ability to be a quarterback in the NFL, and doubt his ability to live up to being a number 1 overall pick. And I just don't know what else the guy has to do to prove that he is truly a number 1 overall pick. I mean, to go undefeated, win the national championship, and win the Heisman Trophy in 1 year at Indiana University is something really we have never seen in college football. He's really trailblazing a path that no one's really went down. And as rare as it is to see smaller schools and schools without established success go on these types of runs, it's even rarer to see these schools have a quarterback who also wins the Heisman and leads that team to be undefeated. And I just say all this to allude to the fact that Fernando, in my opinion, is without a doubt the number 1 overall pick in this draft, and he should be. And he would have been the number 1 overall pick last year. I think he would have been right up there with all of those guys the year before that. Caleb Williams was probably a higher touted prospect, but apart from Caleb, I'm not sure I'm going to sit here and say that Drake May and Jaden Daniels were without a doubt better thought of prospects than the guy who just went undefeated, won the Heisman, and won the national championship at Indiana. I'm just not ready to say that. Those guys had good college careers. They did not do anything near what Fernando Mendoza did this season. With that, he will be the first overall pick. I think that's 100% chance. The way I will put that selection in perspective to me is 100% chance the number 1 pick will be Fernando Mendoza, 95% chance it will be the Raiders taking it. I think it's very, very likely they will just take him there. Now, with any pick, with any team that has a number 1 overall pick, regardless if they need a quarterback or not, I think there's always a chance or a possibility that a team would decide that a certain package or a certain price point becomes worth it to trade off that selection. And with that is why I believe there is the slight chance that the Raiders do trade the number 1 overall pick. But like I said, more than likely, they will just sit there, number 1 overall, be comfortable selecting a guy who I think will turn into their franchise quarterback, a guy who I think will have a ton of success in the NFL. And, apart from going and breaking down Fernando Mendoza trait by trait, like he has an NFL arm, he has NFL accuracy, he gets the ball, out quicker than some guys already playing on Sundays. He can make any throw in the field. In my opinion, there's really not an area that this guy is not able would not be able to be successful in the NFL. And it's become more and more evident the more we've watched him play against the best teams in the country, because let's face it, that Miami defense has plenty of guys who will be playing on Sundays And while, yes, Miami did some things to that Indiana offense that other teams haven't been able to do, Mendoza still had all the answers that he needed to go and win that football game. That's all I have for the national championship. It was really a great college football season. Like I said, one of the more interesting college football playoffs that I've witnessed in my lifetime. I know it's still very young in the life of the extended college football playoff, but some of the upsets and things we saw happen in this college football playoff, I think, really will pave a foundation for just more unpredictable outcomes for the future, which I think is good for the sport overall. If you're just looking at it from the standpoint of college football. In the world of Browns news, Mike McDaniel today, at the time of recording this, it is late Tuesday night, so hopefully, fingers crossed, we don't get any crazy Browns head coach news tomorrow throughout the day before this podcast comes out to you guys. But if we do, just know that I will have a discussion with you guys, obviously, in the later shows this week. That said, Mike McDaniel today did withdraw from the head coach search for the Cleveland Browns, and conveniently enough, I actually left him out of my discussion last podcast, which I filmed on early Monday morning this week. I left him out. I actually just forgot about Mike McDaniel. He kind of completely slipped my mind. From the beginning, and I've talked about this, I don't see Mike McDaniel as a true option for the Browns. I figured they would consider him. To me, the unrealistic nature of the situation starts and ends with the fact that Mike McDaniel did make that PowerPoint all about why he should be relieved from his duties as I think he was a part of the offensive staff here in Cleveland at the time. That was back in the disaster days of the mid 2010s. So, to me, it starts and ends with that. The guy has experience and did experience this organization at its darkest days. And I'm not going to say the organization hasn't changed at all, but more than likely he came into the first interview just kind of dipping his toe in the water to see how much has Jimmy Haslam learned. Is the organization in a better place today than it was back then? And if so, by how much? Because I think without a doubt it is in a better spot, but maybe just not enough for him to consider it worth taking the risk on what could more than likely be his last head coaching position here in the NFL. I also think, additionally, Mike McDaniel is better fit for just taking an offensive coordinator spot. And the reason I say that is because some of the spots that have opened up across the league for the offensive coordinator position are very, very intriguing. You have teams like Detroit, Tampa Bay, the Chargers, and there's a few other that I think Washington, the Commanders too, that have openings at that position. And we know all of these teams either have franchise quarterbacks or have very good offenses. And I think for a guy like Mike McDaniel, who kind of is coming out of a very toxic situation in Miami, where I think his reputation really got damaged, it makes a lot of sense to me for him to, choose the route of going back to being the offensive coordinator for a team, relearn if he did if he did kind of dull out in these areas, relearn and become sharper in the modern offensive techniques, just add to his toolbox, run a good offense, and then hit the head coaching pool again in the next year or two. And I think that's probably the route he will go down. Maybe he'll surprise everyone and take a head coaching job. But I think the combination of He probably wants to be an offensive coordinator, and he has experience with this organization when it was about as bad as you could possibly get. I think those two things put together really made the decision probably pretty clear and obvious for Mike McDaniel, and I think that's why he did drop out of the head coaching race here in Cleveland. The thing I will say is either way, it's not the best look for the Browns. If you're looking at it from the outside looking in the NFL world, it really just adds to this cliche idea that the Browns have this shitty organization, and I realize that we more than likely have one of the worst run organizations in the NFL. But I believe he's really the only candidate that has himself dropped out of a head coaching race. It's just not something that these guys publicly do. Now, will they turn down interviews? Sure. I think it's far less likely, though, for them to take an interview, which Mike McDaniel did, and then proceed to remove themselves from consideration. But the Browns always seem to open these doors that other organizations and teams have not yet done. And this is just another instance to add into that category, I guess. I don't think it has a huge impact on the Browns head coaching search. I don't think, in my opinion, there was ever really I never really viewed Mike McDaniel as a true option. I know a lot of Browns fans, he was at the top of their list, and I understand why. But for all the reasons I talked about today, it wasn't something that seemed realistic to me. That said, we are left with, to me, we are left now with 3 real options. I think the list is actually 4 options and one guy who has no business being on the list, but he's getting the second interview. That guy's Todd Monken. I've talked about him more than enough already. Apart from Todd, Jim Schwartz, Yudinski, and Scheelhaus are probably the 3 most likely candidates at this point, but I think the guy kind of waiting on the outside and potentially still having a chance is Jesse Minter. And the reason I believe that is because he has now accepted his second interview. He's a guy who's had established success in the NFL at a coordinator position, also had success at Michigan, comes from the Jim Harbaugh tree. To me, the thing that felt unrealistic about Minter is Jim Harbaugh has very negative views about the Browns organization. He's been open about that before in the past. So knowing that Jesse Minter would accept the second interview is pretty promising to me for a candidate that I really like. And so that's why I'm not going to say he has no chance. I hear on all the radio shows and UCSS that it's kind of a 3-horse race right now, but I do think Minter still has at least an outside chance to get the job here if he's interested in it. Which, by all accounts, as of now, it seems he potentially would be interested. And for a guy who's a defensive coach, it would make sense for him because of how good this defense is. I think naturally we'll be able to recruit better defensive coaches, regardless of if that's the route we're going to choose or not. Naturally, we'll be able to recruit those guys easier just based on the talent that we have on that side of the ball versus, of course, the offense. So yeah, that's the way I'm looking at the coaching search. To me, we're probably not going to have an answer till next week. I think almost definitely now we're not, because Mike McDaniel, taking Mike McDaniel out of the situation now, I think it kind of muddies things up with some of the requirements they have to hit with the Rooney laws, and we'll just have to wait and see how they go about that route. I think Shieldhouse can't, if I'm not mistaken, Shieldhouse can't enter an interview in Cleveland until next week. That might be incorrect. It might be if he wins next week or this coming weekend, then it's going to be the week after that. I'm not 100% sure how that'll kind of play itself out, but unfortunately, with the way the league is set up, I think it's just kind of a slap in the face to some of these coaches. And I know it has good intentions, but I think in certain ways the intentions aren't, the way things play out don't fully satisfy the intentions that the league made these rules, set out to achieve. But regardless of that, these teams have to meet these requirements, and the Browns will do that. So, I think it just elongates the process a little bit into next week, and more than likely by Thursday or Friday of next week, we'll know who the coach is. And I think this week it'll probably slow down even more than it has been over the past week or two. So, all that said, that's kind of where we're at with the Browns head coaching search. We'll obviously update you guys here at X's and Dogs as we find out more information. If something crazy happens over the next week, I'll obviously have a podcast out to you pretty much immediately following the decision. Last thing I wanted to touch on briefly in today's show is Sean McDermott obviously getting released in Buffalo. Look, I just don't see Sean McDermott taking the job here in Cleveland. It's a very similar situation to Harbaugh. It's a guy who's had a ton of success in Buffalo, who has now a very good reputation in the NFL. I think the only difference with him and Harbaugh is at this point now, there are a number of jobs already taken out of the mix because they've hired guys. I want to say there's been 4 hirings now, so that obviously reduces the pool to like 5 or 6 teams, I think, still looking for their coach, not including the Bills, obviously, which maybe increases the Browns' chances a little bit. I'm sure they're going to do their due diligence with Sean, similarly to how they did it with Harbaugh. But I would be more than shocked if he really considers the Browns as a team that he would coach. I think the more likely scenario is he just takes a year off and enters the next coaching pool, because he did get a really, really late start to this one, having the Bills be in the divisional round of the playoffs. And that definitely plays a role in where he'll end up. To me, the bigger kind of wave created by this firing is the delaying that this is going to cause for the rest of the teams, because all of the candidates that these NFL teams now that have openings have interviewed for these NFL teams, I should say, they're now going to be interested in the Bills job because Josh Allen. It's simple as that. You now have another coaching opening for a Hall of Fame quarterback, and now that's 2 in one cycle, which is really unheard of. I wonder if that's ever happened before in the history of the NFL. 2 future Hall of Fame quarterbacks have head coach openings in one cycle. Like, you barely even get that ever once. It's really rare that would ever even happen. For one opening, completely disregard that happening for 2 teams in one cycle, which is where we're at right now. And of course, I made a tweet about the other day. Of course, the year the Browns are looking for a head coach, it's the season that's occurring, because that's exactly what would happen. I wouldn't expect anything else as a Browns fan, but that's the bigger takeaway for me. It's just going to delay things. Every candidate is going to do their, at least test out if they would have a possibility of getting that job in Buffalo. And, some of the reports are saying that the Buffalo could already have the follow-up coach in mind. Like maybe it's Joe Brady or Brian Dable. That's kind of the names that they've put out there. But regardless, I think until that gets confirmed that they're hiring one of those guys, these candidates are going to want to test the waters in Buffalo. And all that does for teams like the Browns is just make things take a little longer, which like isn't the end of the world, but it's a little annoying for us fans who want to know who is going to be the head coach of our team going forward. But regardless of how long it takes, we're going to get our answers on it. We're going to do our interviews with these guys. The best practice for the Browns would be act like the rest of the NFL doesn't even exist. It doesn't matter where else these guys are interviewing, where else they have interest. Make them want to coach the Browns. Only consider the guys who want to coach the Browns, and just do your best evaluation. And I think that's kind of what they're doing now. I think some of the smoke with Jim Schwartz has died down a touch as far as him potentially becoming the next head coach. Still is a very real possibility. There was a report from Mary Kay that the second interview, there was conversations being had with Jim Schwartz regarding his openness to, maintaining his defensive coordinator spot while having a new head coach. We don't know how he answered those questions. I would say for a guy at his age in his career, he probably wasn't too thrilled with that, but that's just my hunch. Again, I've talked about Jim Schwartz extensively in my thoughts on him as a candidate, so I'm not going to get into that today, but let's just say I would prefer the other options, taking more of a gamble on them than Jim Schwartz. But other than that, I think we're kind of all caught up in Browns news. Like I said, if we get anything crazy over the next 24 hours before you guys get this podcast out to you, I will either make an emergency show depending, or talk about it in the next podcast later on this week. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your guys' work week here. Hopefully it's great for you all. I know we're probably all going to start to miss the midweek football games, the Thursday night games, the Monday night games. I know I already am in that boat, but we still do have, a handful of NFL games left to watch. As always, I'll be here with you every step of the way. As always, I'll see you all very soon. Bye-bye.